Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm Wayne Pohl. I'm a urologist. So I did mostly laparoscopic and robotic surgery in my career. I practiced for 22 years. I then changed careers and started a medical device company. So that was a very interesting experience. I'll just kind of walk through the experience a little bit, but Carolyn Crisafulli, who's in the crowd over there, she and I founded the company, and we had a lot of experiences, made about every mistake you can make, learned a lot of lessons the hard way, but we do know the medical device business, what can go right, what can go wrong, and it's interesting. And medical devices are interesting, period, because they're plastic things that do things. So it's hard to imagine a new molecule unless you're a molecular biologist or you're in that space here at the university, but we all imagine plastic pieces and parts that do something, that do things, and you can hold them, and they make a sound when you drop them, and we imagine things that turn and are in a certain shape. And so we think about devices that make our lives easier in our work, and so if you're in healthcare, if you're in nursing, if you're a surgeon, you think about medical devices because you have that kind of insight to what happens in the domain, what happens in the field, and you imagine products. You know, we all sometimes walk around dreaming about little products we might invent and maybe get lucky and maybe make a little bit of money off it and have the pride of being an inventor, and actually that's what the innovation studio is really about. So, but the medical device world is an interesting world. It's got what I just said about it sounds interesting and exciting, and in many ways it's interesting and exciting, but it's very different, let me just say this before I tell our story, from the pharmaceutical world. In the pharmaceutical world, it's the way that game, if I can call it that, is normally played, is that you invent a molecule, the molecule goes through a clinical trial, it gets validated as being helpful for some common disease, it gets FDA clearance and label claims, which is hard. All that is very hard. It takes several years. It takes quite a bit of funding to go through. And then, even though you haven't made or sold a pill, you can do a business deal with some big pharmaceutical company that otherwise is looking for new products that they can claim to their customers is good for some common disease. So if you have clinical proof and label claims from the FDA that this drug is good for diabetes, asthma, cardiovascular disease, some common illness, then that helps fill the pipeline of those pharmaceutical companies. In medical devices, it's very, very different. You typically have to create sales. So most medical device companies, in their life cycle, to be truly successful, end up putting out a sales force. So, and that's a very different deal. To go from, I have an idea, that there are 40, 50, 60 people throughout the United States selling it, that's full cycle, and that takes an awful lot of money. And usually everything I just said, I have an idea, I want to develop the product, I'm going to make a couple of mistakes, I'm going to put out a sales force, all that's usually $50, $60, $70 million in about 10 years. A lot of money, a lot of venture capital, but in fact, then if you're successful at doing that, there are big, big exits, and so it's kind of the fun of the business, it's a risk of the business, it's a real risk of the business. I mean, these big, big companies out there that you hear about, Johnson & Johnson, companies like Medtronic, these very well-known companies, you'd think that they're constantly on the lookout for new products, but you would just think that. It's actually not what they do. They're sales and marketing organizations first and foremost, and they do very little R&D. They wait for small companies to come to them, having created sales. Most of these big companies do not even have R&D divisions. What they call R&D is what we call sustaining engineering, just taking existing products and making it a little bit better, making them a little bit cheaper, a little bit more capable. They really depend upon an ecosystem of small inventors trying to get venture capital, launching products, having the market thresh out which are useful, which are not useful, having the market teach the company that the human factor issues can still be optimized. And once you've made it through all those gauntlets, then they choose to buy who's left. These companies are resource rich. They have an awful lot of money. They're somewhat idea impoverished, frankly. So they depend upon the inventive community and the venture capitalists to fund their R&D. They'd much rather buy a company that's creating a lot of sales than place bets earlier on products that have not really been through that gauntlet and then have their sales force launch the product from scratch. So that's kind of a very interesting difference between medical devices and biopharma. There are good things about that. There are bad things about that, because launching a sales force is full of a lot of drama. And you can ask Carolyn, because she helped run our sales force, and it's an interesting experience. So our story briefly is this. So I'm a urologist, as I mentioned. I did mostly laparoscopic and robotic surgery. And even this story is very illustrative of medical devices. So when you take a laparoscope, and that's the scope that you use in laparoscopic or robotic surgery, and place it into the abdominal cavity, you get condensation that forms on a cold scope in a warm human abdomen, just like on the windshield of your car. And suddenly you can't see. You're looking through a blurry image. So you've paid all this money, or the hospital has, for HD video and all these pixels and everything else and a big HD monitor, and you're looking through a blurry image. In fact, literature has shown that about 1/3 of the case that the surgeon does, 1/3 of the surgical procedure is done looking through a blur on the lens. So that's not very good. And the most common, to this day, while our product gets relaunched, to this day, the most common way that surgeons right now deal with that problem is they take out the scope about 6 to 10 times an hour, so every 6 to 7 minutes or something like that, and they put the scope in a bucket of hot water to heat it. And they wait 30 seconds, and they put it back into the patient. Think about that. That's the most modern technology to prevent a surgical scope from fogging, is to stick it in a bucket of hot water. I mean, NASA wouldn't put up with that for about 2 seconds, right? They don't have people spray hot water, and then the defogger in your car works without you spraying hot water on the. So it's very common, actually, what you'll find, that surgical technology, just to teach this lesson, lags behind common industrial and consumer technology by usually about 20 to 30 years. You'll go into an operating room, and the core technology that you'll see is not the most inventive thing. It's technology that has been around in other industrial processes for several decades. And then finally, the inventive kernel happens when someone plays the match game. When someone says, you know something, I have seen this work in the car wash that I go to every day, every week or something, or I've seen something work in a children's toy, and that could be useful in this one domain that I work in nursing, in the operating room, in the cath lab. So that's why it's so common for end users to be the people who start these companies. Because someone who's just a marketing guy doesn't know enough about the domain of the OR or the cath lab or the pathology department to play that mental match game where you go, I just know that this technology could be useful. Now, you might think that if you have that idea, gee, here's a technology I think it can be applied in this domain that I know really well, and I just know that if that were available in the right form factor, and it's got to go through all these processes of design and get FDA cleared, I just know that would be helpful. You might think that, gee, if I have that idea, probably 1 million people have the idea. I'm sure J&J is working on that already. You're wrong. First of all, there's no way J&J is working on it, but if you've had the idea, there probably are many other people that have had the idea. But the chance that you'll be the only one who does anything about it is really high. So playing the match game between someone in this room, anybody working in the cath lab, for example? I don't know, or the operating room, or, okay, well, there you go. So having that kind of domain knowledge and thinking about what do you do in the operating room, if you don't mind if I ask?
Just circulating, Ryan.
You circulate? Okay, so see, circulating nurses can think of so many things that are awkward, from the supply cart to how it loads, to how it unloads, to how things go down to central processing, right? I mean, you've probably got 6 or 7 things right now that you just know are awkward. Yet, even in the movement of supplies through the operating room, all those logistics of how to move things have been solved by FedEx probably 25 years ago. There's probably so many things that they do every day. I mean, there's this new technology now, I just saw it last week when I was in California, of putting different amount of electrostatics on different products, and then they go down a conveyor belt, and the different amount of electrostatics decide where the product goes. I mean, imagine that in central processing in your hospital. When someone's dropped something on the floor, you're trying to get it quickly flashed and brought back to the operating room. So playing that being the end user and playing the match game between existing technology and how it could be applied, there's great value there, and there is a good chance. So the way you find out when you're actually in the field, like I was with our product, that a lot of people think of these ideas and almost nobody does anything about it, is because it's very common when you're in the field with your idea that someone will say to you, you know, I thought about doing that too. You go, yeah, you and 500 other people, but it's rare to actually do the work, have the energy, raise the capital, form a company, manage a group of engineers, manage a sales team to go out and do something. So that's just very interesting. So our story that Carolyn and I shared, and Carolyn and I ran my medical practice for a couple of decades and then left to start our medical device company, lenses fog during laparoscopic surgery. So have you seen that in the operating room when you've been in laparoscopic cases? And what do you have, a bucket of hot water, the usual?
They have a little sponge with lens cleaner, but they are in and out.
The little battery-operated one?
No, not
Oh,
that one.
something else, a little scope heater?
It's just a little square sponge.
There you go. Okay. So, so we decided we were going to solve that problem. And the first thing we did, and this was interesting, is we limited our thinking. We thought to ourselves, well, you can have maybe a little windshield wiper, and 9 out of 10 people in the room have already thought about that because, you know, you're used to common experiences like windshields on cars. They have windshield wipers. So you thought about that, but then we saw a bunch of issues with that. Meanwhile, we're also checking patents, and obviously that idea must have been patented 100 years ago. It's so obvious. So we thought about that. But then we thought to ourselves, and this was kind of fun, we limited our thinking to what sources, we wanted to do something novel, what sources of energy are already on the surgical field? Well, as you know, when you do laparoscopic surgery, you inflate the abdomen with carbon dioxide to create a space. So it turns out that medical CO2 is dry gas. It has no water in it. It's purposely anhydrous so the bacteria doesn't grow in there. So it doesn't clog the insufflation filter on the way in with humidity. So we developed a product that would flow dry gas over the lens. So it's a constantly moving curtain of dry carbon dioxide that would be over the lens. It was a shield. It's a shield of see-through gas that would shield the lens. And it is and was and is, well, was, and will soon be again, the only product that actually prevents loss of vision during laparoscopic surgery. So instead of having to constantly clean the lens or remove it, it'd be nice if the lens somehow didn't get dirty at all. So we embarked on a journey. We developed a product called Flow Shield. The flow of CO2 was used as a shield, like the shields are up in a Star Trek movie, in a Star Trek program. And we had a product that prevented loss of vision. It prevented debris from settling on the lens. So we launched our first product, and that decreased scope. So scope removal is also loss of vision. You take out the scope and clean it when you can't see what you're doing. So loss of vision is a proxy. Scope removal is a proxy for I can't see what I'm doing. And you clean it and you heat it like I've articulated. So we decreased scope removal by about 80 to 90%. And we found that more often than not, or more often than we wanted, that difference wasn't appreciated. Once we told somebody we had a product that prevented scope removal, even if it happened 90% less, they'd say, hey, the scope still got dirty. So that was the reality. Now, you might think that's illogical, but that was the reality. So then we had to go back to the drawing board and develop a product that decreased scope removal 100%. And we did that. But that was a pretty complicated product. It had more tubing on it and more features, and it clogged up the operating room field, frankly, with a lot of tubing. And then that was a problem, because then people didn't like the fact that there was a lot of tubing. So then we finally had to go back and come up with the original product again, improved, the kind of the 90%er, and then invent some messaging that hopefully the customers would accept why just 90% approval was good. We would remessage the product so that they would appreciate our product, but not have an expectation that it would never, that the scope would never get dirty. So everything I just mentioned in the course of 2 or 3 sentences and maybe 20 seconds, 6, 7 years, to pull it back, relaunch, pull it back, relaunch, and probably $20 million of venture capital. You know, we had 5 or 6 engineers and a bunch of salespeople that were idle for a while and then selling product again, and so it was very interesting. So Carolyn and I set up our own R&D facility outside of Dayton, Ohio, and then we did our own manufacturing. So it was really a lot of fun. We did everything internally. It was a vertically integrated company, all the way from, oh, gee, I have an idea, to selling product. Carolyn managed all the overseas sales. And we had great clinical data, so it was a very, very nice product. And one lesson that's interesting, I just told you how we launched the 100% product to decrease scope removal, but it was a little bit too complicated. So one lesson is simple is more important than best. Simple and better beats complex and best. You want a product that is so intuitive to look at that you almost don't even have to be instructed on how to use it. Salespeople will only sell products that are easy to sell. The best salespeople out there will only sell a product that they have to do very little work to sell. The engineering mindset and the sales mindset are very different. The engineers want to make it perfect, and the sales guys want to get the happy hour. And so as the CEO of the company, you've got to manage that. At some point, you have to shoot the engineer to get the product out so it actually gets launched, that R&D can stop. But the product has to be sufficiently engineered to the point that the salespeople find that they can spend very little time in the OR, teach people how to use it, and move on to the next OR. So that's what you're managing when you're the CEO of a medical device company, that nuance the product fits that hairy edge of it's new, it's better, or it's cheaper, it has enough capabilities, there's enough technology, but in fact it's easy for the salespeople to sell. So that was very interesting. And then you've heard of robotic surgery, and we did a deal on the Intuitive robot with a robotic surgery company. Then last summer we actually almost went public in Australia. Long story why Australia. And then that didn't all work out for a bunch of new dramatic reasons. And then finally we sold the company and to a group of investors on the West Coast. And so I'm still helping that company right now, the new company, and we're moving manufacturing either to China or Costa Rica. We're not sure yet. And reestablishing distribution, not with our own sales force this time, but with one of the big companies. At least that's what we're trying to do. So it was a very interesting experience, going all the way from an idea to a product. So that's fun. It's fun to see a product assembled and manufactured that you thought of. But in fact, in the medical device world, you have to prepare for going all the way to actually selling product and creating sales. Just the idea is not worth anything. They won't even pick up your phone call. And patents, you have to have patents, otherwise you can't get investors. But you can't sell patents. No big company is buying your idea, your patent. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. You have to have it, like you've got to have footers on your house, but you can't sell just footers on a house. So anyway, that was our story. Very, very interesting story and great product. It's a wonderful ride. We love watching people make our product that is being manufactured and sold in 12 countries. And it's a very interesting set of experiences that continue to this day. So great product. It was not all that successful financially, but the product is living to fight another day. And this is not an uncommon story, by the way. The idea that products struggled for a while. I mean, here's our story. Our product struggled. I mean, at the end of the day, we're doing about 3,000 cases a month globally. And it's well known in the industry, in the medical device industry, among all the big players, that we have by far the best product in this space. but they want to see, in medical devices, they want to see you get to about $20 to $30 million a year in revenue, and then they're happy to pay a multiple of that. But that's kind of where the world turns in medical devices. Very, very different from biopharma. So anyway, kind of an interesting story. I just went through 8 years and 15 minutes, and are there any questions that I can answer? I know we're up here later for a Q&A as well, but we've seen everything that can happen in the medical device business, and some things I wish I hadn't seen. Okay, so, yes, sir.
Are you still practicing medicine?
No, I'm a recovering urologist. I switched careers 8 years ago when we did our first venture capital round. I gave up practice. It's hard to do both. So
That's my question.
that's what I figured. That's why I said that. It's really hard to do both. So when you're, are you a doctor? Are you a practicing doctor?
No.
Okay. Because at some point you have to choose whether you hand the company over to someone else, you wish them the best, you stay in touch, you're the chief medical officer, you've got a share of the company, and you just hope it's successful, and you stay to your day job. Or if I wanted to have a career in business, so my venture people liked me and said, yeah, you can continue to run the company, but you can't also practice medicine. Those are, when you practice medicine, I have an expression that the nurse in the room will understand is, patient care is very distracting. It doesn't matter right now what you're in the middle of. Your beeper goes off, your patient's bleeding somewhere on the floor, you're out of the room. You've got to go take care of that. So it's very hard to do business and the practice of medicine simultaneously. At some point you've got to choose, and that's what I did. It's a good question. Anything else? All right, thank you very much, Stuart.